Okay, so we're going to actually talk about contextual theories now. So critics who use contextual theories tend to look first at the environmental influences on a work of art. So economic systems, cultural values, and the politics of the time are very important because obviously with a contextual theory of art criticism, these critics really care about what's going on at the time in a certain culture where the art was made. And contextual critics tend to favor works that either embody important cultural values or reject them. So we'll actually look at those same pieces, but just on a contextual theory of art criticism here. So Titian's Pieta, it's an altarpiece for public viewing in a chapel during the time of the epidemic of plague in Europe, and it kind of expresses mortality and grief. So we'll take another look at this through the contextual lens, basically. So this is an altarpiece designed for public viewing in a chapel at a church in Venice. So it was painted during a time when the plague was running rampant. And the theme of mortality and grief takes on a lot of meaning in that context. So the fact that he chose to represent death and grief actually fits into what was happening at the time, which was a lot of people were dying from the plague. And also that vacant niche that we mentioned earlier in the middle of the piece here, it symbolizes death, and Titian's depiction of the dead Christ must have given comfort to many of the Venetians who had lost relatives in the epidemic. So we'll look at Basquiat's horn players. So we'll look at that through the contextual lens, basically. So bebop movement of the 1940s. Charlie Parker is represented, and he was cut off in his prime, kind of mirroring Van Gogh. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail. Ornithology, a track recorded by Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, who are jazz musicians, Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. So we'll take a look at this through a contextual lens. So Basquiat admired the leaders of the bebop jazz movement, which originated in the 1940s, and which is kind of, this work is actually an homage to them. So saxophonist Charlie Parker is at the upper left. Red musical notes are actually pouring out of his saxophone here. The ear that seems to be cut off may be referenced to the painter Vincent van Gogh, who actually was an artist of similar innovative power. He was a visual artist, though he wasn't a musician like Charlie Parker. And he actually cut off his own ear, Vincent van Gogh did, because he was actually going through some mental issues. So this ear being cut off here may have reference to kind of Vincent van Gogh and kind of being cut off in his prime, basically. And we can make out the name of trumpeter Dizzy Gillespie at the top center, so right here. And we see him pictured at the right here, so here's his trumpet, and there's Dizzy Gillespie. And the word ornithology refers to one of Parker's musical composition, which he and Gillespie actually recorded together. So here we go. You can see that's a couple different areas where that's at. Together they must have created the alchemy, which is a magically transformative mixture of things, which those words appear here, that the artist wrote in the lower right. So in this work, Basquiat affirmed and referred to an important African-American musical movement. So even though it was in the 1940s and this was in the 1980s, 40 years in the grand scheme of things is not that much of a spread in years. So really contextually what was happening at the time, was this African-American movement in music. And we're actually going to go look into the expressive theories. So art is made by people. So the skill level, personal intent, emotional state, mindset, and gender of the creator plays a role in the creative process. Artist-centered theories are thus termed expressive theories. So this theory of art criticism, the expressive theory, has everything to do with the artist, like who made it, who is he or she. If formalists want to know about dates and contextualists want to know about the background or the culture during the time, expressive critics want to know who made it. So critics who favor this approach tend to look for powerful personal meanings. So Pieta, it was painted in the last year of Titian's life, somber reflection of mortality that has to do with the fact that Titian himself is dying. So Titian painted the Pieta in the last year of his life, so hence it's a somber reflection on death, and that expresses the artist's own thoughts about his own mortality, which is actually very near. He's getting older. He knows that he's, this is the last year of his life that this was painted in. So it actually has a very deep personal meaning. Indeed, the figure at the lower right in the red shawl is actually thought to be Titian himself. And we actually know this from other self-portraits that he's done. And anyone who has ever mourned can probably identify with Mary's grieving attitude in this painting. The brushwork is very loose and expressive. See the Pieta here. So that's Mary with her son after his crucifixion. He's dead and she's holding him. So that's Pieta. And many believe that this represents an old age style in which the artist has really cast off all restraint from his younger days and has painted with greater freedom. So that also means like he's painting in the way that he wants to paint because he's older and wiser and he just doesn't care anymore about what other people think. And so that loose painterly style might have something to do with that too. But critics of an expressive style really care about the artist and what the artist is going through at the time and what the artist is trying to express. So the fact that Titian actually painted himself into this piece is actually a very interesting detail. So we'll take a look at Basquiat's Horn Players once again. So it's kind of like a 3-verse song. Artist history, he's harkening back to the fact that he's African American, and his intent and intense personality is expressed in this piece. So critics of an expressive style tend to really like Jean-Michel Basquiat because his works are full of personal meaning. So the interesting part of this is that his use of line is very much his own. He has his own personal style that seems both intent and intense, which are characteristics that the artist displayed in his life and in his personality. So the intensity contrasts nicely with the seemingly casual arrangement of the figures and script. And this painting does tend to come together as a 3-verse song. The work explores the artist's personal history as an African American by upholding examples from the music world and showing us some people that are important to the artist personally and who he probably looks up to. So he really is kind of bringing in his own emotions, his own history, and his own, the things that he enjoys, and his personality in the way that the style in which it was created, the very bold, youthful style. He was 21 when he created this work, so it really does kind of tie into his personality in actually a really visible way. So we might ask ourselves, what makes art great? Well, one might say, it's great if you think it is. Well, everyone's own personal ideas are different. So it's kind of hard, like I said earlier, to judge a piece of work unless you have some sort of structure. But there are several things that make a work a masterpiece that deserves a place of honor in, say, a famous museum. So the 3 ingredients for a masterpiece are as followed. So number 1, there needs to be some degree of innovation. There needs to be some important contextual meanings. And there needs to be a recognizable personal statement. So as you can see, all of these things kind of meld with all of the 3 different theories of art criticism. So formal, contextual, and personal or expressive theories of art criticism. And not all 3 of these things are necessary, but at least one should be strongly present in a great masterpiece. So cash value does not necessarily mean much in the art world. It does not determine the quality of or importance of a artwork. So just because an artwork is expensive does not mean it's better than another piece that is less expensive. There was actually a portrait of Christ by Leonardo da Vinci that sold for 450 million, but art historians found a lot of invasive restorations on it and overpaintings on that piece. So the high price that it sold for did not necessarily equate to a work that was actually in good condition. And basically, the only thing the art market can really tell us is what collectors are willing to pay for a work at any given time. That's only it just tells us what collectors are willing to pay. The art market does not give us any bearing or measurement of the quality of the artworks being bought or sold. In addition, the cash value of many artworks cannot be known because they are outside of the marketplace. So a lot of them are in museums, for example, and they're never going to be sold. So generally speaking, dollar values have little bearing on either the historical importance of a work or its degree of innovation. So just remember, cash value does not necessarily mean great. So evaluating art with words, this is a pretty important skill, and I might actually talk about this in the next video.